Swords. Swords, swords, swords. And the thing is, why do we like them so much? And that question is actually different for everybody. So it's not something that can be answered just with one question. I mean, yeah, swords are cool. Kind of like this one, the new Tachi. Because when you think about it, swords are very simple. There's not much to a sword. You have a handle, a guard, and a blade. That's about it. That's all you have. Now, granted, in order to perform really good cuts, you should have some training and practice and everything else. But for the overall aspect, they're a simple thing. Even if you don't have training, you're bound to cut something. It may not be the best, but you're bound to cut something. For a lot of us, if you grew up in the 80s, there's all those ninja movies you saw. I remember growing up seeing the original TV series Shogun, which they have a remake coming out this month. But still, and it's not just Japanese swords, it could be European swords, it could be Scandinavian, British. So it's like, what draws certain people to them? And I think it has to do with times. People always say those were simpler times, but when you think about it, it really wasn't. I mean, you had cases of war, famine, plagues, bandits. So you had a bunch of stuff going on even then. Was it much simpler in the sense of living wise? Maybe. A lot of countries still, even like today, they had taxes they had to pay. So just in today's standards, we have better means for curing things. Okay, so because I wouldn't say like their homes back then were really shanty, because some of them are actually still standing today, whereas more modern homes, yeah, they're problematic. So maybe in simpler and the way the homes were made, and you just use a candle for light, you know. So, but still, then you look at the historical aspect of swords. All they were was a sidearm. Kind of like, you know, people use for firearms, pistols, you know, sidearm. But still they're used for battle or defense. On top of that, you have the symbolicness of them. So if you're a royalty or high ranking, like the samurai, you always wore two swords. That distinguished you as high ranking. But still, does that really answer this question of why most of us just love swords? Like I said, this is not a question that it can just be answered in a simple form. Because there's so much involved for each person that's involved in swords. And I've noticed there's more and more people coming to the forefront, getting involved with them, whether it be long sword, Roman sword, Viking sword, Japanese sword, Chinese swords, you name it. More and more people are getting involved in it. A big, I think, component or drive for it here in the past couple of years was HEMA. Even though there's already people on YouTube doing videos on swords before even HEMA came into the forefront. And these are also people who have a love for swords. And swords have been around for centuries. They're still going to be around for centuries more. I don't see them going anywhere. Now you take like the katana. A lot of people love the katana. Katana like this, or like this, or like the tachi. Some favor the tachi. Some favor the gunto. Now, people always say, "Oh, the katana, they were absolutely perfect." To a certain point, they were perfect. You could say that with a Dao and a Jin, okay, because they were handcrafted too. When you do things, humans do things by hand, there's a point where you get to that's perfect, because we're human. There's still going to be flaws in it. That's just the nature of the beast. But it's not just the symbol of the katana that I like about these. And this is what people, I think, forget. And that's why sometimes I hate how people want to modernize the katana. You know, that word that I hate. Tactical. Like the Honshu. I think they dropped the ball on that. They could have had a good sword and just screwed it all up. But what you're taking away from it when you modernize something like the katana is not just the status that it held for ancient Japan, but people forget this. As far as I know, this is the only sword that is interchangeable. And what I mean by that is, you can take the handle off, right? You could take the tsuba or guard off just by 1 or 2 pegs. Now let's say I want to change this tsuba out with this tsuba. Granted, this is not a flashy one. It's a little bit smaller than this one. But I can do it. If I want to take this sword and put this saya with this sword, I can do it. If I wanted to. Would the fit be the same? Probably not. Would it work? Yeah, it would. You can buy sayas at any custom sword manufacturer, so Zenoshar, Hanbon, even eBay, and Amazon. Spare sayas. I bought them. Some fit where you have to kind of file it down so it fits in perfect and snug. Some you may have to shim. They're 100% perfect. But they're interchangeable. You can switch them up. You can build your own. I've put together 2. Ordered a bare blade. Ordered what saya I wanted from a different company. Ordered the tsuba. Fitted it all together. So that's also the beauty of the katana. It's interchangeable if need be. So it's not like, crap, my blade broke and I don't have a forge, but you have another sword, another katana. Well, let's say the handle was messed up on that one. Well, I'll just take the handle off this one, put it on that one, and you're back in action again. So, like I said, that's the beauty of the katana. It's not just the status and what it represented, but also it is very interchangeable. In fact, some samurai actually would have, historically, they had 2 to 3 spare tsubas that they would interchange with their sword. And there were either for weddings, ceremonies, maybe going to battle, maybe they're going to see the shogun. They would interchange them depending on the situation. So that's another thing that's really cool about the katana. Unlike now we take European swords where they're pinged at the bottom. So you can't take the handle off. It's a done deal. Your sword breaks, you're done. So even with the katana, if the sword broke, but you wanted to keep, back in the day, all the fittings that you had, well, you can. Tsuba's already pre-made. So the swordsmith makes it, you take it to the next worker, you say, this is what I want on it, to the ska maker, and he would fit it all on there for you. So you weren't out a ton of money having to have every single aspect of it made. Because that's another thing with the katana. A swordsmith is just making your blade. He's not making your tsuba. He's not making your habaki. He's not doing the handle and wrapping it. He's just making your blade. That's it. That's all he's done. So you have all these other people. But, like I said, if your sword broke, but you wanted to keep all this right here, you still had it. And they can do it. But the 80s also had a lot of those movies where a lot of swords were involved. And then the most, like, cult classic for a lot of people too was Highlander. Not the other two. The first one. I don't even include the TV show. But the first Highlander movie, that was really inspiring, besides all the, the BS ninja movies. Because if you really pay attention to that movie, if you haven't seen it in a while, rewatch it. There is actually a different range of cultural swords in it. You just didn't have an uchi katana. You had a long sword in it. You had a rapier in it. The one character, I'm not sure where his character comes from. It seems like maybe Africa or something. His black friend that he meets on the bridge, his sword was a single-handed sword, and it looked more of that region, maybe Africa or Middle East type sword. So it was represented almost like a saber. It's kind of hard to see in the movie because of the action going on. So there's actually a range of different swords being used in that movie. And from what I understand, they actually cut out a couple of fight scenes out of that movie, which one he fought is Krieger fights. I think he was the character was supposed to be from China descent, and if I remember correctly, like in the screenshots that I've seen, it's like a Jin that he's using. So they had other cultures and other swords involved in this movie. It's just they had to cut some down for their time slot. So that was another movie that was really like prominent for a lot of people growing up, because nowadays you have, I think, another aspect in most recent times to influence people to get into swords. We had Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, granted, some of those swords, I mean, would they be practical? Some of them are, some of them aren't. Yeah, obviously, they're fantasy. So people go, oh, they're starting to make fantasy fully functional. Yeah, and they are. But how effective are they? When it comes to maneuverability, how well do they perform? If that makes sense how I put that. Because when you take fantasy and make it reality, it doesn't work out too well sometimes. Or you just look at it and go, that's just the ugliest thing I've ever seen. It just doesn't work. It's like people modernizing the katana. Like I said before, what people don't realize, that's the beauty of the katana. It's interchangeable. If you take that away from it, you're taking like a part of its history and part of what it is away. Now you can't interchange it because it's all solid. The katana wasn't meant to be that way. I mean, that's why they still make it the way it is today. Practicality is basically what it boils down to for them. It was practical to be able to take it apart, but also it served another purpose. You could interchange stuff on it if you had to. So yeah, we had Lord of the Rings, that came up, and I'm sure that kind of like inspired a lot of people to look into swords, because I know all of you have had this look when you tell the people that you collect swords and you use swords, which is you just spoke a foreign language and they totally didn't understand what you just said, or that you're totally insane. But the thing is, why should people who want to collect swords, use swords, train with swords, be thought of like, well, for lack of a better word, stupid? And that's the thing. It's like I said, it's a simple weapon. Because that's basically what it is. It's a weapon. It's not a tool, it's a weapon. It was designed for one thing, for battle. So, and I think it's because we're in such as people are so comfortable with this time period in day and age with the technology we have and so many firearms accessible to people, they forget it wasn't always like that. I mean, when you went on the battlefield before the invention of gunpowder, those were scary times for people. I mean, there's no way out of it. It's not like your enemy is 1,000 yards out and you're like, well, he's 1,000, 2,000 maybe, and 5,000 yards out, I'm safe. You know, I'll just pick him off from here. No. And granted, yes, they had archers. Yes. But the moment that enemy starts advancing on you, and they're getting closer and closer and closer, now they're like 20 feet away, 10 feet away. It's a scary thing. Now it's like, especially if they're 10 feet away from you, there's no like, don't get away from it. They're right there in front of you. But then this is also a day and age during that time period that people were trained. They were not really trained, that's the wrong word. They were born and raised to fulfill those roles, some of them. So it's a totally different mindset for them than what we do today. Today, yeah, here in this country, you have the choice to sign up or don't sign up. But then the way we train people, it's like, and I think that may be a contributor to so much PTSD in people who have gotten out of the military. Because you think you're ready for it until you get there, and then they train you to think, well, it's not a human being, until reality hits and you see action and everything just going awry. Some people, your mind's going to snap a bit. So there's a big difference between these time periods, whereas when we'll take the samurai, when you were born, or even knights, you were being raised to fulfill that role later on, if need be. Now, granted, you can have all the training in the world. Doesn't mean something in your mind's not going to snap. But there's a big difference from raising somebody up from childhood to be a warrior than you're a kid in the suburbs, living the greatest life. You're now 20, you join the military. So you have no concept of what's going to happen, whereas they're raising you, if you don't do this, and you're a little child, when you get older, you're going to die. Because they're going to try and kill you. So that's being repeated in your head on a constant basis, which I think is kind of messed up to how to raise a child. But that was the time period. Some people may disagree, and that's fine. But like I said, I think people are too comfortable nowadays, so we forget about the history of what people went through and why they cherished their swords so much, because this was their lifeline. Even if you weren't like a knight, you were just a regular person, let's say in Europe, but you can afford a sword, still was your lifeline. You know, it wasn't something you just scoffed at. You took really good care of it. Because you figure about the 15th century, swords in Europe were everywhere. A lot of people owned them. Japan, Edo period, 16th century, yeah, normal people could not own a katana. That was reserved only for the samurai. But they could own a wakizashi. You could go in to any smith or store that had sold weapons and you could buy a wakizashi. It was perfectly legal. So commoners, common people, could be walking around with wakizashi and for protection. It was fine. So even there, if you had the money, people had swords. For me, it was a combination of things growing up. Like I said, I saw the 80s ninja movies, thought they were cool. And then you grow up and you find out it was all bullshit, which is fine. It's fantasy. There's nothing real about it. But also the Shogun TV series. Yeah, it was kind of, from what I remember, it was kind of corny and this and that. But it was a good show. And then you have Highlander. You know, so we had a lot of movies with a lot of swords. Then you look at Conan. If you grew up in the 80s, even now people have heard of the movie Conan. And then you had Conan the Destroyer. I'm pretty sure anybody in the 80s growing up who likes swords has seen Conan. So I think it's just a combination of things. The historical part of it, which when you really start looking into the historical part, and when I say look into, you've actually got to read multiple articles to find a lot of information. You can't just read one. Like, I just never go just to Wikipedia. I mean, Wikipedia is a good start, but then you got to go and look. Like, I go to the Samurai National Museum online, that's in Japan. When I want to look up historical swords and everything, that's how I found out, like, the middle of the 14th to the middle of the 15th century, their blades were tapered at the end, and they weren't wide at all. Actually, the really wide blades that you see, even like in Japan when they do competition cutters, that is a more modern blade nowadays. They started doing that in like the 30s or so. When tatami cutting was getting really popular in Japan, they started making the blades really wide. So that's more of a modern thing. And then what we would call now as a O katana, that is more of a modern thing, not back then. They did have like O and whatnot, but not as much as you see now. So you really, really have to dig, and because there's multiple sources out there, and historically things change all the time. They're always finding new things, new evidence all the time. So it's good to look at multiple things. So but that's the beauty of it when you get into the historical part, whether it be the katana or like Viking swords. You know, you really get into the history of it and why it was designed that way and how they used it, how they even made them, you know. It becomes very interesting. And then you get this form of respect for them, because it's not easy to forge something. It's actually really hard, especially if you're forging something, you know. Traditionally, this would be 32 inches long. Well, that was only because you were on horseback. So if you're sitting on a horse striking down, you need the blade longer. But since Nowadays we don't ride on horses. We have cars. Don't need it that long. But this is a 27, just about a 27.5-inch blade. But to put a curve on that, and the handle goes with it, so that takes a little bit of time. Forge that all out. You know, and then to do this elaborate, you know, saya, the wrapping, everything. Oh, just a little side note that I caught after I did the review on this video, and I'll show you guys. So if you look at the saya, look at it real carefully, which this is rare to see. This saya tapers down here. So a little side note on this, which no sword rattle, which is kind of nice. So yeah, thought I'd throw that out there. Hopefully this inspires other people to make videos. What really drawed you to want to use swords? Because like I said, I've noticed there's more new people coming to the forefront and everything, which is a good thing. Which is a good thing. I think we should get to have simpler times, or trying to make things simpler instead of complicating the hell out of things, because that's the one thing humans like to do. We like to complicate the shit out of things. And I think people are getting tired of it. They really are. So, that's all I got for you guys. And I'll see you later.